To me, this was part of an overall package to say to people, we're going to reward work in America. That's an American value, to reward work. And this
That's
Children's Health Insurance Program does
CHIP, Children's Health Insurance, is really for working families, because non-working welfare families have Medicaid, but CHIP is for working families who aren't fortunate enough to have employer-provided health insurance for their children. Family coverage.
You bet. And without CHIP, there are a lot of hardworking Americans that just can't afford health care for their kids. So this sends an important values message to working families out there. We are going to better reward you for working rather than being on welfare, and it's a great program for children. And you're funding in your budget bill for education a $7.9 billion increase over the administration request. Means smaller class sizes. It means better education for our kids, better paid teachers. It's good for America.
Going back to the CHIP, one of the things we did, very first 100 hours we were in session, was adopt as a rule of the House the so-called pay-go rule.
Right.
That's not just some diversion, some excuse for not taking real action. In the 1990s, that was one of the budget rules that helped us discipline the process and move a budget badly in deficit into surplus, a surplus of $236 billion, believe it or not, the year before the president came to office. That's what we handed over to him, a budget in the black for the first time in 40 years. But one of the reasons we were able to get there is that we said we're not going to create any new entitlement programs or enhance any new entitlement benefits without either directly paying for them or making an equal cut in entitlement spending elsewhere. And by the same token, we said we're not going to have any tax cuts as long as we have a deficit. If those tax cuts worsen the bottom line, the deficit, because they take away revenues that would otherwise be making up the deficit. PAYGO was the shorthand for that. And even though we are pushing SCHIP, State Children's Health Insurance Program, as our premier initiative this year on the Democratic side, we also, as Democrats, propose to pay for it. We propose to go out and find the offsets that will pay for whatever amount we finally commit to the expansion of this program.
And you know, pay-as-you-go is a common sense, fiscally sound principle that working families can understand. If you want something, you have to pay for it. And I'm glad your budget resolution brought us back to that conservative principle that did result in surpluses in the 1990s. And once that pay-as-you-go rule went out the window under previous leadership in the Congress, out went that window the budget balances and surpluses we had. So I know that it's going to make it difficult for us. We may not be able to implement every new education and healthcare program as quickly as we'd like, but we're going to do it on a fiscally sound basis that leads to a balanced budget. And considering half of every dollar we borrow today comes from foreign countries, that's a sound principle, conservative principle, that I know you made a key part of this budget.
It's one of our biggest concerns. Next to interest, which is mounting and displacing other priorities in the budget, but it's obligatory. If one thing has to be paid, is truly an entitlement, it's interest on the national debt. We don't have any choice. It has to be paid.
Well, in fact, I know a lot of people are concerned about jobs that have been lost because of foreign trade and competition. And the fact is, one of the reasons we can't negotiate better trade deals from time to time is China and Japan have so much of our debt that we can't be too tough with them in a trade negotiation. So balancing the budget, frankly, even helps us protect American jobs as we can negotiate much fairer trade deals than we've seen.
Well, when President Bush came to office 6 short years ago, foreigners own about $950 billion of our national debt. Today, 6 years later, they own about $2.1 trillion of our national debt. And some of these foreign countries, foreign central banks, are countries that we don't necessarily have a common interest with. If we get along with them, but we don't necessarily have the same values, the same foreign policy, the same objectives, and that's got to be a concern.
It is a concern. The fact that when my 2 little boys woke up this morning, we were almost $500 million more in debt than they were yesterday morning when they woke up. And the fact that half of that extra debt is being funded by the Chinese, the Japanese, Venezuela, countries that don't necessarily have our best interest at heart, is not a good thing for our families, for our businesses, and our future. And so that's why I think it's so important. Your budget gets us back on a glide path to where you helped bring us in the 1990s before
we hope
policies
on our
were
path
changed.
We'll get to balance by the year 2012. I'd like for it to be sooner, but we hope to get there by 2012. Now, one of the accusations made about our budget was that we increased taxes.
That's so wrong. As you know, the Budget Committee doesn't pass tax bills. The Ways and Means Committee does
Furthermore,
that.
we left in place all of the tax cuts passed in 01 and 03. All of those tax cuts, the marital tax penalty provisions, the 10% bracket, the reforming of state tax, not the repeal, but reforming it so you get about a $3 million credit.
Right.
All of those things were left in place. Not a single one of them was repealed. And while the tax cuts will expire December 31, 2010, that's 3 years away. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. In any event, we didn't put that provision in the budget. That was the way the tax bill was originally written when our Republican colleagues controlled the Congress.
Not only is there not any tax increase in your budget resolution, but you sent a clear message to Congress. You want us to deal with the alternative minimum tax, which could cost 1 out of 3 American families on average up to $3,000 in extra taxes if we don't fix it. So I'm glad you addressed that in the budget resolution. So, you know, just because somebody says something in Washington about a bill doesn't make it true. And clearly the allegations that there were
no
tax increases in this bill
and all
were
the tax
false.
cuts are right there in place. If you enjoy them in 2006, you can take them in 7, 8, 9, and 10. And in 10, we'll decide what to do. If we've still got huge deficits, we may have to make some compromises. But that issue ought to be forced upon us. If we're stacking debt on top of debt and still having big tax cuts, we've got to make some choices probably. But the key thing is they're all in place. That decision will be made later, and hopefully we'll have a surplus at that time that'll allow us to extend the tax cut.
You bet.
That's the plan.
You bet. And just as we did in the 90s, and I think we're taking a new direction, and I know you've been a real leader in this, and I'm proud to be on your budget committee with you in support of a new direction to have a budget that reflects American values, strong on national defense and homeland security, takes care of our men and women who've served in uniform, our veterans and military retirees, gets us on a glide path to a balanced budget while investing in top priorities, education, children's health care. I think those kind of values reflect American families' values.
We've got 1 minute left here on energy and water. Tell us in less than a minute what we're doing about alternative fuels, because that's a big concern and a big factor in our future.
John, if you look at the budget on say over the last 5 years, we're not spending any more today effectively on alternative energy research than we spent 5 years ago. So if we were accused of trying to develop American energy independence, there wouldn't be enough evidence to convict us. And I've opposed those budgets. And while I work with the administration on a bipartisan basis on a number of issues, in this area I think they have not done nearly enough. And
we do have some new initiatives coming down, but they too are not enough. We need a Manhattan-style program so far as I'm concerned. And while we're doing more, we're still not doing enough.
Absolutely, and I think this budget will allow us to make small steps and hopefully bigger steps in the right direction to be less dependent on foreign sources of energy that really hurts our economy.
Chet, it's a pleasure to work with you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, John.
And thank you. Tune in next month for This Month in Congress.